but like everything comes down to, canst thou weight transfer like a Westie?
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to another zany episode of Nerdy West Coast Swing, the podcast with pixels where the anchors are out of this world and the points don't matter. We are here to help train your eye so you can learn faster and dance better. I'm Cassie Winter.
I'm Alicia Marshall. If you're wondering who are we to be analyzing these pros, Cassie and I both have extensive training and experience in both partnered and solo dancing. Cassie has about 24?
Yes.
And I have about 26. I had to calculate that in my head like right before.
It doesn't help that the last 4 years that we've been doing this has been an absolute blur.
Yeah, that too.
Time has lost all meaning.
Yep, pretty much.
Without further ado, let's dive into what is quality of West Coast swing movement.
Yeah.
And to me, like, this is what swing content is. Like, yes, there's the basic, like, a pattern is or is not a West Coast swing pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you look at the definition of swing content for, like, the US Open routine divisions, for example. Right. But, like, this what we're talking about today is a little bit harder to nail down because it's a range.
Mm-hmm. In general, like, the biggest piece that we want to take a look at initially is weight transfers. I think that has the most effect on what you're doing as a whole, and making sure that the timing for that is correct in terms of the way that you're choosing to strike and transfer the weight, but also making sure that you're doing that correct with the music that you're dancing to and with the style that you're trying to go for. Because if you're wanting to do a little bit more kind of like blues, it's going to look a little different than if you're wanting to do more like contemporary type weight transfers timing wise. In my opinion, that's the biggest thing to look at because it controls so much of what we do, right? The weight transfers. It communicates to our partners. It gets us on the correct foot so we can move in the correct direction. It really affects the way that the connection feels. Like, there's so many pieces that it is important to, that it's really the biggest thing to look at for quality of movement for West Coast swing specifically, in my opinion.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And to break down the components of a weight transfer. So there is the foot strike, which is when your free foot initially comes in contact with the floor. Mm-hmm. And then after that is the actual transfer of weight. And in West Coast swing, you're more often than not actually just like shifting your body through space to put weight over top of that new foot that you've placed on the ground. There are instances how much of your weight and how fast depends on where in a West Coast swing pattern you are, where in your triple you are. And there are also instances where you will maybe like apply pressure to the floor, but not shift your weight over it. And understanding when to use which technique and why in West Coast swing is part of that quality of movement technique that we're talking about. But like everything comes down to, canst thou weight transfer like a Westie?
Yeah.
That's going to be the intro to this YouTube.
That seems appropriate. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, so the weight transferring like a Westie is so important. It's what helps create that smooth look that we go for, right? Mm-hmm. And it has to also do with that foot articulation, the rolling through, has to do with that as well, and how that's affecting the rest of the body, right? Because you want to make sure that when you're doing your weight transfers, that rolling through the foot is going to go along with it. Like it's a chain of events.
Yeah. So it's like, if you're just doing kind of marching in place, practicing your weight transfers, the foot strike starts with the toe, then it rolls to the ball, then the heel. And then that affects the knee. So the knee straightens, and then the straightening knee affects the hip. That's how you're starting to get hip swing. And then your upper body shifts to compensate for that weight transfer, right? And you're basically going back and forth. In West Coast swing, the emphasis is on the up. So once you've completed a weight transfer, your body you're not trying to like reach for the stars or anything like that, but you're like relaxed in an upright position, and then you go down a little bit into your foot strike, and then you stretch up again into the finished weight transfer. In like East Coast swing, for example, it has much more of a actual digging and swishing situation, and the emphasis is on the down, on the dig, on the weight transfer, whereas in West Coast swing, the emphasis is on the completion of the weight transfer. And the other cool thing about doing it that way is once you finish shifting your weight completely over to that foot, that should naturally let your free foot collect underneath you to be ready to take the next step.
Yeah. And that is like the biggest piece of making West Coast swing.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like we were saying earlier, like, and like you were just talking about, like you can, in other styles of dance, you have weight transfers, obviously, but you're going to do them in a different way. Like you're saying with East Coast, it's different. Like with ballroom, like there's a lot more of kind of like that reaching effect where you're reaching out in front of you and it kind of, the weight swings almost. And then it kind of, the word I was going to use was cascades. That's sure. Weight cascades up over the foot, whatever. But it's a totally different way of moving the weight on top of the foot. And so that's why it's such an important piece. Like it's what makes things look so smooth for us. And it gives the sway that we're looking for. Side to side sway, not the front to back type sway with room.
Yeah. And like if you think of waltz, for example, there isn't any hip swing in it, right? It's much more of like the whole body lilting together over the foot swings, whereas in West Coast swing, and also in a lot of Latin dances, although how it happens and in what directions is different, we're breaking the body up into pieces along the chain from the foot to the tip of the head. And it's not all happening at once. It's like knocking over dominoes. So the first domino is the foot strike. Then the next domino is the foot flattening onto the ground. Then the next domino is the knee straightening. Then the next domino is the hip moving. And the next domino is the upper body compensating for all of that. And it tends to be more, the hip action is more side to side, like you were just saying. Whereas in Latin, for example, it's not only to the side, but it's front or back. So from a bird's eye view, you're getting a figure eight motion from the hips, depending on Latin versus or international versus American versus social. One will have more side movement in that figure eight, whereas one will have more forward and back movement in that figure eight, for example. Right. Every time I would do rumba, my hip would go out.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
Connective tissue disorder for the win.
Yeah, pretty much.
I would also have like older people come up to me, both men and women, obsessed with my hip action, and I'm like, don't do that. Don't. Did you think about that first? You didn't, did you? Go away. Creepy.
Yeah.
Ooh, this also reminds me way back in one of our earlier episodes, we had someone on live with us who was arguing that because male bodies, and he was implying assigned male at birth bodies, because they don't have hip curvature in the way the body is structured, the tissue is laid over top of the hips, that they can't do hip swing like a woman, someone assigned female at birth.
Right.
That is a lie.
Yeah.
Anybody can do hip swing.
Yeah.
It will just look slightly different.
Exactly.
Depending on what your body looks like. But it's a physics thing. It's the physics that causes the hip swing.
Right. Exactly. And especially with West Coast swing, like the swing of the hip, it has to do more with what the whole body is doing, not so much just the hips, like with the more Latin type hip, whatever hip action. So especially for West Coast swing, that's not something that should be a problem for anyone, because of the whole body is moving together as it's happening. And it's more about the angles that you're creating with the body as you're moving that's creating that hip swing effect, right? it's not actually just isolating the hips and swinging them.
Fidget toy for the win.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to know what these are, they're called tangles. They're my favorite fidget toy ever. This is a novel experience for me because I'm not driving like a slow motion computer program. I can just talk and engage.
Yeah.
I feel so much more present. This is really exciting.
Yes, totally different experience for us tonight. But yeah, so like I was saying with the West Coast swing, especially, like you're not isolating your hips. It's the angles you're creating with the body that's making it look like that hip is isolating and swinging, but it's not. It's not. Everything's moving together. Yeah. You are one piece.
There's things you can tweak to make it look more, like to emphasize it, but you don't have to at the basic foundational technique level.
Yeah, pretty much.
I'm curious to know what words you would use to describe what the upper body does after the hip gets the message from the floor.
I kind of feel like there's a little bit of a tipping and rotation, almost.
That's more specific than what I was saying, so thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I would say. That's at least how I think of it. Once your hip is prepared kind of up, then it's like a tip and a swing with the upper body. And that also frees up that hip to be a little bit more opposite direction to make the swing even more visible.
Yeah. And then we start moving up into triples, which is trios of weight transfers. And depending on who you're learning from and what context you're learning about a triple in, you may get confusing what seems like different information. But this is where the contextual part of like, when are you doing this triple will determine which version you're doing, because some will say they describe the triple in amount of weight transfer. So like partial, full. So partial weight transfer, for that's hard to say fast. Partial weight transfer, partial weight transfer, full, partial weight transfer, full weight transfer. I did it. But like in other instances, it might be like a full, partial, full. Like it depends on the context of where you're at. But the majority of the time it's partial, full.
Right. And also when you are getting in that swing action where you have kind of that like tipping of the body in conjunction with it, sometimes you're tripling all over on one side, and then so it's not even necessarily like a weight transfer per se, because with weight transfers, it's where your like center of gravity is located over the ground. And so if you have some swing in it, then your upper body is gonna be kind of in one spot as you're tripling and then stepping to swing, triple, step to swing. But it kind of depends on how advanced you are, where you're doing that in your dance. So
and then would you agree? Is this a blanket statement that I can be blanket about? A successful full weight transfer means you could hang out there balanced if you so chose.
Generally, yeah.
Yeah. Obviously there's like inertia and stuff, and sometimes you're booking it, so you'd have to apply stopping power to hang out there. But in theory, because like a complete weight transfer frees up the foot you just left, and therefore you could put that foot wherever you want or nowhere. You could stand like a flamingo if you so choose.
Yeah. Yep. I would generally agree with that. Yeah. Apart from, like I was saying, when you have kind of that more like a sailor shuffle-y type triple of sorts, where that weight transfer is, yes, technically happening, like you're stepping on different feet, but in terms of like center of gravity where you're at over your feet, it's actually kind of not really changing all that much. But And in that case, because you are kind of in that tipped position to swing, then it's not going to be easy to have that stopping if you're doing a full weight transfer. You probably really shouldn't be doing like a full weight transfer necessarily, right? Just because you should be evenly weighted when you're kind of tipping. So, anyways.
Which brings up like a really good point, because like in a West Coast swing dance, there are times when your triple isn't traveling and there are times when your triple is traveling, and which part of your triple is traveling may also vary. So when you get the feedback like keep your feet underneath you or get over top of your feet,
right,
this is like they're seeing something that is probably helpful, but those words aren't necessarily going to help you understand what to change to function better.
Right, because it's not a constant, right? It's something that, yes, there are certain times you need to be up over the foot, keep your feet underneath you, but there are also some times where that's not going to be the case. And it's going to be detrimental to you to think of, okay, I always have to have my feet underneath me.
Right.
Again, this is this like range of correct technique, right?
Yeah.
Where things aren't 100% one way. And I think that that's something that we kind of fall into when we're teaching things, right? Is that it's like, well, you need to do it this way. And it's like, well, yes, in most situations you'll do it this way, but sometimes you won't. Sometimes that's not feasible. So it's not a black and white thing. I think it's better to think of it as like in general, here's what you want to do. But that's not always going to be the case. So don't feel like you have to force yourself into something if it doesn't feel right.
Right. One of the terms that I really enjoy using when I'm teaching in person is I'll say, this is a training wheels concept. And just adding that terminology helps them understand like this is correct in this context. And then if there's time, I can touch on other contexts where it is also valid, or give examples of instances where it's not. When you're a teacher, it's really, really important to be clear about when you are making like a rule of thumb gross platitude and being like, but yeah, no, that's generally true, versus exaggerating and making it sound like something is true across the board when it really isn't.
Yeah. That's how we end up making life so much harder for ourselves.
Yep.
Let's see. Talk about triples, anchors.
Yeah, anchors.
The next piece. Yeah.
So now we're getting into territory where what role you are dancing is also dictating what is the correct range of technique. And anchors into your ones are, I would say, one of the biggest like swing content building blocks that we have outside of patterns that is more easily recognizable. And I feel like it's also something that people could be like, yeah, that one was really good. That one, I mean, it was okay. It got the job done, but it's missing something.
Yeah.
And we're hoping to help fill in some of the what's missing part.
Yeah. And to be like super clear, because we just talked about triples, right? A lot of people will refer to triples and anchors as the same thing. An anchor is a redirect of your momentum or what direction you're moving in, changing it to a different way. And then the one is the first step after the redirect. So first step into the new direction.
Yep. And basically, when done correctly, the anchor is a prep for the one. So just as important as a prep is on the 3 and of a sugar tuck, an anchor functionally needs to work well to prep a 1.
Yeah.
For both partners. If you're working hard to make your 1 look good, you're working on the wrong thing.
Yeah.
It's the anchor you got to work on.
Yeah.
Because a good 1 regardless of what role you're dancing,
The
is
follow through.
dependent on the anchor
Mhm.
working correctly.
Mhm. Yeah. A good one is a follow through.
Yeah.
So
Bingo. So, which role do we want to get specific about first?
you can go first.
Nah. Awesome. So, the way I think about a leader's anchor is the partner that is doing the most physical work in the redirection is actually the follow, because they're going from traveling aggressively in one direction to traveling aggressively in the equal and opposite direction. That's kind of like a basis for how West Coast swing is. Whereas a leader, they're creating that from more or less a stationary position. Yes, a leader can float their anchor. Yes, a leader can. We're talking about basics right now. If you think about like a basic, boring underarm turn, a leader really isn't going anywhere, whereas the follow is going. I find we're going to get a little therapy. We're going to therapize a hot second. I know I have led an anchor into a one well, and I have done it well in myself when the follow had a really easy time redirecting and they didn't have to work hard.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the reasons why I'm such a popular leader, is because follows don't have to work hard with me.
Yeah.
I just create the correct scenarios for, regardless of their technique, but that matches their technique. So like, oh, your steps are this big, so I will aim for you to end up over there for your anchor.
Yeah.
You tend to have this much weight in the connection, therefore I will counter it appropriately so that you feel a one. Like if I have a follow that's being really heavy and I try to lead them lightly, I mean, it can be done, but that's advanced. We're staying with basics tonight.
Yeah.
So when we're thinking about the triple step, that is the anchor, I am in part stopping a follow's momentum, so that way they stop traveling through their anchor. Again, we're just talking about basics. And I am prepping myself to take that amount of weight and send it in the other direction. So I have an upper hand that I'm in a larger body. So I don't have to shape as much or pitch as much to redirect the amount of weight in the connection. Others will have it differently. But like if Miles Monroe can lead me effortlessly, no leader of any size has any excuse.
Yeah.
Also, Tessa can lead me pretty effortlessly. So she's not a walking boulder like Miles. So like really, if you think you're too weak to lead, like if you're in an assigned female at birth body, it's the technique that's failing you, not your body size or muscle composition. I promise you. Why don't you take a dive into the follows, and then we can like, because they're very intertwined.
Yeah. Yeah. So for follows with an anchor, like you were talking about, the main thing for follows is that, we are being accelerated and slowed down, accelerated and slowed down. And so the anchors should be happening in the middle of that, more or less. Right. We should be getting slowed down first, and then the one should be kind of more acceleration. And our anchors are happening in the middle of that, right? So in the middle of that, we're being given a new direction to move. And for follows, the important part in that is making it a smooth redirect, right? We don't want to like be like a ping pong ball, right? So it's important to have kind of some arcs in what we're doing in order to continue the movement, and not to have like just a back and forth, like going in reverse in a car and then going back into drive, right? We don't want that. We want to make it more like if we're doing a gradual turn in our car, not so much that we're reversing and going back into drive, right?
Yeah.
Don't know where that came from, but
I love it. And that is a perfect example of why I wanted you to say something, because like so much of leading a good anchor into the one for me is finding what the follows arcs are. Because like you can successfully lead a follow of pretty much any skill level if you can figure out what it is that they're doing.
Yeah.
And meet them where they're at. So like some follows don't, they only arc back away and toward me.
Mm-hmm.
And in which case I don't try to add any lateral movement in my anchor. And when I say in my anchor, I mean both in my hand where I'm leading them and also in my own body, because it would confuse them if I were to go side if they're going away from me. Like when you have two much more advanced dancers, you can have contrary shaping and arcs because we know how to resolve that as a partnership. But at the basic levels, you're wanting to both be on the same page, more or less doing the same kind of thing on either end of the connection.
Pretty much. Yeah. Should I add anything to the anchors for the follows?
I think timing was the thing that blew my mind. Through what count as a follow are you still moving away into the anchor?
Yeah. So basically, for the follows, if you have that good technique where you are arcing and you're not just going forward and back, generally you're going to have a delayed one. And that's going to equate you continuing to go back when you're going through your 6 and then as you're coming through that one, that's when you're starting to move forward. Like it's not like 5 and 6. Now I'm moving forward 1. There's much more of a delay in it in order to really fill out the connection and make it a smooth connection. Is that what you wanted me to talk about?
That was it. And it's so funny because like I've always understood that from a leader's perspective. Like, yeah, that's what I want my follow to do. But for some reason, it never jumped the fence.
Yeah.
Because I had just been told so many confusing things about how I was supposed to achieve that as a follow that I just wasn't anywhere near there. I was in Albuquerque when I wanted to be in Portland. Like it just was not happening. If we simplify it, the 6 through and up to the 1, you're going away, and then the 1 you're going towards. But with a leader, you're going away the whole time, basically, because and you're just changing how much intent in that away you have through your 6 and it's like a breaking, it's a softening. You're creating that smooth, cushioned end to the rope for your follow, and then you're taking that energy, and as soon as it's starting to already redirect back at you because of the physics, like they've reached their rope, then you take that and you add energy to it and you move yourself. That's a kind of weight transfer that is, I think, the one that confuses leaders the most, because there are multiple ways to do it. The most straightforward one is to just push off of your right foot and just take a step back, and where your weight transfer and the foot strike are more together instead of displaced in time. And that's how a lot of leaders learn and start off in West Coast swing. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
Even at the more advanced levels, I still use that depending on what kind of pattern or what kind of musicality, what kind of timing I'm trying to lead. Like that is still a really important technique. Now, when you start to get into the territory of trying to lead a 1 without necessarily traveling anywhere, because that is possible, that's where a lot of leaders get confused. They're doing all of these wiggling things underneath themselves, and the follow isn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
We can all picture it. I'm like the crabs in that Crab Rave music video. That's why when we were talking about weight transfers, like that is king in quality of movement technique, and it's king in distinguishing between different forms of dance. So even with your feet underneath you to do that foot strike on 6, if you have prepped yourself correctly for the swing that we were talking about earlier, your center of gravity will shift a little bit. It's not going to stay perfectly like a sailor shuffle. It'll stay perfectly underneath you, but we do want like a slight shift so it can affect your follow. You want to affect your follow when you're leading a 1.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why that gets lost in translation. It's like all these leaders are like, look at all this stuff I'm doing. And the follow is just like,
I will be here.
so the same action that when you complete a weight transfer allows your free foot, the one you just left, to collect back underneath you, that is the same action that leads a follow forward.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are striking your 6 with your right foot, you are in theory rolling through all of it and you're standing up, but your left foot is still where you left it. Your follow it probably isn't going to feel anything.
Yeah. Right. And that's because it's not pulling the center of gravity with you necessarily.
Bingo.
Right. Because when you still have a foot out away from you, that center of gravity is still going to be more forward. And for you to move your follow, if you're going backwards, you need to have your center of gravity back behind the foot. Right. And so if you have a foot out in front of you and you're trying to go back this way, like it's a lot hard. You have to do a lot more moving in order to really move that center of gravity. And really, if you're going to leave that foot out, you're going to drag it with you as you're moving.
Right.
If you're going to leave it out.
Yeah. And this is where we see symptoms of like leaders really pitching forward from the hips and like shoving their butt back because they're not moving their center of gravity and like collecting their feet underneath them. So like they understand they need to affect the follow and they're problem solving and they're figuring out a way to do it. And I'm like, yeah, you're trying to figure it out. But we're going to the easier way to do it.
The easier way to do it.
So maybe what we'll do for our follow-up video is just do some drills and show some differences between stuff.
Yeah.
Does that sound cool to you?
Yeah.
Yeah. I can do something like, see, this is salsa. This is not West Coast swing.
Yeah.
And I will probably go on a rant about sailor shuffles because I'm really tired of people saying the second step is together when it's not.
Yeah.
A real sailor shuffle. You're supposed to look drunk, people.
Yeah.
It's the whole vibe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you tell I was a Lindy Hopper? The last 3 things we had for quality of West Coast swing movement was talking about tension versus compression versus neutral in the connection. And then your basic like pattern swing content, pass, push, whip. And then like we talked about with your anchors into your 1s, anything from there on is also role dependent to make the technique look right. So this is another thing that like I see that just drives me nuts as someone who specializes in both leading and following. I see people go to dance their non-dominant role and simply because they have general quality of movement from their dominant role, their non-dominant role is going to quote unquote look better. But a lot of the times they're not actually doing the quality of the roles technique, the new role. And it drives me bonkers.
Right. It's that thing we were talking about earlier where you're mirroring or you're mimicking the same shaping, but you're doing it in a totally different way.
Yeah.
So it's not actually effective.
Yeah. Yeah.
So while it might look at first glance like you are doing what you are supposed to be doing, if you take a closer look, it is physically on your body looking correct, but you might not actually be doing it correctly in order to achieve the goal. So
bingo. Yeah. So I guess we will be back with a couple of demos, I suppose.
Yeah.
I'll have to clean a portion of my apartment.
Right. Who knows where I'll be at?
Filming. Maybe I'll be outside. Who knows? I can go swing in the rain. I got an umbrella. And also, since this was a new format and it was born of simply everything being too much for the past couple of months. But if y'all enjoyed just a Talking Heads episode,
let us know.
Let us know, and we will do more.
in terms of how you're liking the format, and if you have any ideas that you would like to hear us talk about or do our normal format for.
Yeah.
Let us know.
And we still have our Patreon, which is where we do constructive criticism for all levels. So if you want to see that, head on over there. And it looks like we're going to be back at Swingcouver hosting a talk show style shenanigans. We are currently brainstorming with the wonderful Sarah Van Drake to make it different from last year. We've got some fun ideas and we are excited. Going to be much more chill. You will not have to have woken up at the break of dawn. I'm particularly excited about that one.
Oh, yeah, we'll still be talking with some of our lovely champs that are going to be there. So.
And the changes we've heard about how the event is going to be run and how the ticket prices are excellent. They've made excellent changes, and I'm really excited. It's going to be much more accessible and affordable for people. So, and we hear that the Facebook has been evil and has killed the event. So please go to their website. Don't look for it on Facebook. Find the information on their website. Anyways, and we're also going to try to have Kyle on before.
I was just going to say that. If there's anything y'all want us to talk to him about, let us know.
Yeah, very excited. Okay, I think that's enough advertising. Thank you all for joining us.
We'll see you next time.